Welcome to Lift Your Legacy. My name is Jacob Rupp, father, husband, and rabbi. And each week we bring you an inspiring person or message to help you unlock your inner potential and create change that will impact the future. Thank you for listening, and let's get to it. It gives me great pleasure to bring to you today Rabbi David Aaron, who is an absolute visionary and an educator who has spent the last 3 decades diving into the world's biggest questions, answering it for people, answering it for himself. He's written 8 game-changing books. I've read many of them. Also has a yeshiva Orayta in the Old City, and has just been someone that has been on the scene educating people around the world about a unique way at looking at spirituality. It gives me great pleasure to bring Rabbi David Aaron on the show today. Rabbi Aaron, thank you very much for joining us today on the Lift Your Legacy podcast. I wanted to start, you've been in the, business of making spirituality and Judaism tangible and real and positive for people for quite a while. And I'm curious if your approach or your thoughts have changed significantly from the time you got started until today.
I don't know if significantly. There's nothing that I write in my books that I wouldn't continue to support. But I think my thinking over time and having to share it with so many different people has become more organic. Ideas have become even clearer. And there's more of a sense of the abstract is becoming a lot more concrete. So I don't know. I mean, I'm growing, so I hope that my ideas are growing with me.
So what does that mean? The abstract is becoming more concrete.
Well, I'm finding ways to share ideas and developing, let's say, the sound bites to really help people get it. And that's what I mean in terms of like really taking ownership of it. I mean, I think that's the challenge, and that's what I love to do. I like to take deep ideas and make them simple without them becoming simplistic. I don't want to dilute and compromise the depth. On the other hand, I want to be able to help people get it on whatever level they're at. And so I've just developed more ways as well as more metaphors. I got involved with the whole animation production thing, and that's been very helpful. A lot of people find those animations very, really help them get the whole point.
So 2017, are we better off? I don't know, when did you open Isralight or really get involved in teaching full time?
Is 30 years ago.
That's wild. So 30 years later, are we looking for the same things? Are we more disconnected? Are we searching? What do we need now?
I'm afraid we have less seekers than we did. When I first started Isralight, you had a lot of people backpacking across the world, stopping off at Israel, people on their way to India. Certainly it's changed. It's changed, and people also have less patience. That's, I think, one of the reasons why I got into Facebook and animations, because you have to say it faster, clearer. You have to write that this is only 93 seconds because then they won't even open it. So people are very patient. They want it now. And so a person that's truly looking for truth needs to be patient. So it's a tough time right now. It's a tough time. I think there are less seekers and less patience for the depth of the process of seeking.
So tell me about that process specifically. Let's say a person was inspired and we're over, and I became observant when I was in college, or as observant is kind of an ongoing process and possibly the foundation of the question. But you have that moment where you think that there's more, you start to search, and then you start to commit your life to living in a Jewish fashion. How does a person grow meaningfully in a relationship with Hashem? How do you transition? How do you move from sort of the day-to-day life, of which Judaism does designate a lot of it, and how do you transition into this life of a tremendous connection to God?
Well, it starts off with, what do you really mean when you say God? I mean, a lot of people are living with and being sadly tormented by a very childish image of God. And where did we get our image of God, anyways? Most of us created it from our parents. We've created God in the image of our parents. And so before I can have a relation with God, I have to first kind of date God and get to know God, or what does Judaism mean, God? That's why I'm even uncomfortable with the word God, because I tell my students that I don't really believe in God. I believe in Hashem. The word, the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, the Hey, the Tetragrammaton that's put in the Torah is very different than most people's juvenile understandings of God. And so I really understand atheists, because the God they think they're supposed to believe in, they shouldn't, and is some form of an idol in some way. So
Can
the
you
first
can you
thing,
can you share that? Can you just delve into that a little bit more and say it more explicitly what you mean?
yeah, taking God's name in vain is, so to speak, one of the uh, serious offenses in Judaism. But what does it really mean to take God's name in vain? It means to take God's name in an empty way. And what would make that empty? Well, let's say I talked about water all day long, but I never ever tasted it, never ever saw it, I never jumped into it. So then I'm taking the name water in vain, because there's no concrete experience or reality that supports the noise I'm making. So if a person's thirsty and I give them a piece of paper with the word water on it, I've really done nothing, because it's just noise. And so, sadly enough, a lot of the spiritual search often are people talking a big talk that doesn't really correlate to an experience. So, what gives the word water meaning is the direct encounter with that liquid stuff that comes out of our taps. And if we never had that experience, then it's just a word, and it's worse than a word. We could start believing in the word, and then it takes on its own life. It's an idol. So, if I say to my wife, "I love you," and it's just a word, and I don't really have an experience that correlates to that word, so it's empty. And what's worse is I've convinced myself that by saying the word, I'm actually connecting to her, when I'm actually disconnecting from her, because I'm just saying a meaningless word. So for a lot of people, experientially, the word God or even Hashem is experientially meaningless.
Okay, so I mean the big difference, I guess you can say, is with a wife or with water. You have some foundation for approaching it. I mean, I in my own life, I've had moments where I've had this overwhelming feeling, but they're very few and far between. So what does that mean, how do you experience God?
Well, as long as you think that God is a particular being somewhere over there, you will never experience God, because that's not God. But most people think that is God. And that's why they're so frustrated, because every step towards the infinite leaves you an infinite journey ahead of you. And at some point, you get frustrated. But when you understand, as the Torah describes, the word Yud, He, Vav, He correlates to the Hebrew word Havaya, which literally means existence or reality. And so God isn't a being, God is actually all being. And every person you meet and every place you are is in some way a reflection and expression of God. It's not God. Like right now, you're talking to Rabbi David Aaron. I am Rabbi Aaron, but Rabbi Aaron is not who I am. I'm much more than a rabbi. I'm also a father. I'm also a son. I'm also a husband. These are different, we call partsufim. These are faces. And so too, everyone you meet and every place you are is, so to speak, another, so to speak, face of Havaya, of ultimate reality, Hashem. And that's a very different orientation than most people think, especially as we approach Rosh Hashanah with the heavy metaphor, which is a beautiful metaphor, a poetic metaphor, but not to be confused with reality as it truly is. The God is actually sitting on a throne somewhere, and there's actually a courtroom, and there's actually two books in front of him, and he's got a little quilt, a little pen with a feather, whatever. That's metaphor, that's poetry, that's meant to inspire us emotionally. If I were to, I could describe a tree scientifically, and then I could describe a tree poetically. Two people hearing my description might not even think I'm describing the same thing. So there's the Tanakh describes God in prophetic, poetic terminology that's meant to speak to our hearts. And then the Kabbalah describes God in a very metaphysical. Kabbalah looks very much like a science. Are they talking about the same God? They are, right? But neither one is describing God as he is, because we will never know God as he is. We can only know God as he appears to us. And he really appears to us in everyone and everywhere at every moment, without confusing. The idolaters, they thought that tree is God, and the tree is not God, although the tree is an expression of God. So too, if a person thinks that I am Rabbi Aaron and Rabbi Aaron is who I am, that's kind of what we call idolatry. You've severed the particular manifestation from the essence that's being manifest. So when people say, well, Rabbi Aaron, when do you feel God? The answer is, when do you not feel God? Just take your pulse. Is that you beating your heart? It's not me beating my heart. I don't even know how to beat a heart, And so, even when I'm talking right now, this is Rabbi Aaron talking. I don't even know how to talk. I don't know what I'm doing. I do all day long things I don't know how to do. So are these my powers? So when a person experiences that the powers within them are not from them, that's a serious leap forward in experiencing God. It's like, when do you experience gravity? How do you know there's gravity in your life? When you feel a force pulling you down. And when do you know God is in your life? When you feel a force pulling you up. And so when you feel a force pulling you up and you want to live a better life and be more compassionate and be more loving and be more kind and find more meaning, that's a person living in the presence of God.
So you mentioned this idea of, and I'm just trying to distill down what you're saying. You mentioned this idea of a desire to be more as God is described throughout our writing. So the reason why we would learn Judaism is so that we can essentially learn to recognize which feelings of ours are godlike that we are being drawn after. Is that what you're saying?
Look, Judaism is essentially not so interested in describing God as he is, because we will never know God as he is. The truth is, science will agree that we will never know anything as it is. We will only know everything as it so appears to us in our limited minds. But what Judaism is trying to do, and not just trying to do, has successfully done, is give us a way to live the impact of God in our lives. A person who has the presence of God in their life, this is how they would behave. And so that's why our scriptures, our sages tell us that Abraham lived all the commandments before there was any revelation. Well, a person who is in touch with the presence of God in their life, then they will naturally behave this way. And if I don't behave that way, then Torah says, here's the way to behave that would enable you to tap into feeling God's presence in your life. But again, just as I don't know what gravity looks like, I don't know what gravity feels like, but I do experience the impact and the, so to speak, the symptoms of gravity in my life, because it pulls me down. And so too, the symptoms of feeling God in your life is to be kind, to be compassionate, to have integrity, to treat people in a sensitive way. And we go on and on and on. To serve God means to serve to bring good to the world.
Clearly, I recall you mentioning this in one of your books, that you didn't grow up with this being your natural, the way that you were raised, so to speak, and you had to find this on your own and through mentorship. Do you remember kind of that moment that you had a breakthrough? Was it a breakthrough? Was it a period of time that got you to a space? But like, if you could bring me back to that original time when, so to speak, your eyes were opened, what was that like?
Well, for me, and I think for a lot of people, before you get to the breakthrough, you go through a lot of breakdown. And so I'm a son of a survivor. My mother, may her memory be blessed, passed away a number of years ago. She was a survivor of the Holocaust, but she was not the type that talked about the Holocaust. I just knew some horrible thing happened to my mother, as well as I knew that my grandparents were murdered. But there was no discussion about it. And one night, in the middle of the night, I heard my mother screaming in her sleep. And I woke up startled, and I assumed, although there's no way that I knew for sure, that my mother was having a dream about the concentration camp. And that night, as a little boy, I was flooded with questions. Is there a God? And if there is a God, is he good? And if he is so good, why is the world so bad? And if we're the chosen people, I wish he chose somebody else. And these questions haunted me for a very long time. And the only way I could deal with them, because I didn't know where I could find answers, I didn't think there were answers. So when you don't believe there's answers to your questions, what you do is you run away from your questions. And so I spent a lot of time running away from my questions. You know, part of it was comedy. I just decided I'd laugh my life away. Part of it was rock and roll. I thought I would dance my life away. But when I was about 18 years old, I was, I guess, led. I happened to go into a talk of a fellow that was not a rabbi, but he wore a beanie, he wore a kippah, and he had tzitzit, the string sticking out of his pants. And I was impressed. Here was a guy that was proud to be Jewish. He was a guy that clearly believed in God, lived with God, and I didn't. I was pretty angry at God, but then again, being angry at God already you got to have a lot of belief to even be angry at God. So it's been a journey. It's really been a journey, and I think a lot of people may enjoy my books because I didn't say, oh, there's all these people with questions out there. I'm going to go research their questions and offer them answers that will work for them. My books are really my journey. My books are my own struggle. My books are really my own attempt to find peace with the God of the Holocaust that I grew up with. You know, so it's a journey, and it's taken a long time. And I'm not finished.
I'm sorry. Well, no,
Apologies.
God willing, hopefully for many years to come. Do you think that the current generation and the people that are coming, across and speaking with you, do they still have that specter of God and the Holocaust? Did the modern Jews even connect to the Holocaust, or are we just sort of looking for a connection and not really knowing where to go?
I think a lot of people are looking for a connection and don't quite know where to go. Unfortunately, as a friend of mine put it to me, to give me a sense of where a lot of Jewish people are in America today, he said, "Where is your mother from?" And I said, "Poland." And he says, "Where's your father from?" And I said, "Russia." He said, "Well, how Polish and Russian do you feel?" So I don't feel at all Polish and Russian. He said, "Well, that's how a lot of Jews feel." So you said to him, "Well, what religion is your parents?" And they say, "Jewish." And it was also, "You're Jewish." No. Why does that make me Jewish? Because my mother was Polish. That doesn't make me Polish. And because my father and mother are Jewish, a lot of Jews, they are so disconnected from that kind of identification with Judaism. And I'm not blaming anybody. It's just a fact. It's just a situation. But one thing that I don't think has changed is everybody wants a good life. There's nobody that doesn't want to feel good about themselves and feel that their life, they're living the most worthwhile life. Now the question is, so what is the most worthwhile life? I mean, I haven't met a person that doesn't want to be happy. And yet I haven't met too many people that actually are happy. And so we're failing miserably that our greatest goal to be happy is not being accomplished by, I think, the majority of people. So maybe we got the wrong definition of happiness. Or maybe we didn't come here to be happy. Maybe we came here to be whole. Maybe we're here to live a full life, which includes learning to laugh and learning to cry, but that's a whole other talk. But
well, I want to ask you point blank, what would you say if I would ask you, and hopefully I'm not jumping out of my the box of inappropriateness here. Would you say that you are happy that that's not supposed to be a goal and that you sort of wipe that out as being a main focus of your life? How do we as people look at that? How do you look at that?
Well, you know what? When my parents died, I was in incredible pain. And for those of our listeners or viewers know a little bit about the mourning period in Jewish halacha, Jewish law. There's the 7 days of the Shiva. I was in a lot of pain and I was crying. And I felt this sense of deep happiness that I knew how to be sad. So I think people have a mistake. They think happiness is smiling and dancing when I believe happiness is living life the way it should be lived at the times and the appropriate orientation that you should. If it's a time to be sad, you should be happy that you know to be sad and you know how to express your sadness, you know how to feel your sadness. And that's a very different kind of happiness. My happiness includes sadness and, let's call it, small, undercase, lowercase happiness. There's uppercase happiness, which includes sadness, which includes crying, And so to me, a person that isn't able to experience the spectrum of the human experience, the human emotion, isn't truly happy. People that are running away from sadness are going to end up depressed. You see, I believe a lot of people are depressed not because they don't know how to be happy, it's because they don't know how to be sad. And because they've been running away from really feeling sad when they were supposed to feel sad, they ended up being depressed. When if it's time to cry, cry. And when it's time to laugh, laugh. And the secret is to know what time it is.
Where do you think that comes from? Because that's something that I'm afraid now it's very public, but I had this very strange thing that there was a movie, and at the end it was a sad movie, and it was on Netflix. So I literally had to stop it 3 separate times and watch it over 3 days, so I didn't break down and start crying. And my wife was like, "What's wrong with crying?" And it sounds like that's very similar to what you're saying, is that there's a certain stigma to not being able to be in touch with something that's profoundly, like, I guess, real, like real sadness, real anger, real happiness, whatever it might be. We try to kind of put it all in a box. Otherwise we'll lose control.
I think people are confusing lowercase happiness with uppercase happiness. Uppercase happiness, I mean, why do people go to movies and cry? They're obviously enjoying it. In a strange way, they're crying, and yet they feel a deep happiness that they know how to cry, that they know how to feel empathy, that they're being real with their emotions, and that they're touching life in the spectrum of all its colors. And so I do think that people have the wrong definition of happiness, and they think that only the people that are smiling are happy, or that when they're sad, oh my gosh, I'm not happy. When if it's a time to be sad, then you should be sad. And in a strange way, enjoy it.
Okay, I want to be cognizant of your time. I have 3 other questions, and I'm not going to add anything more to that. I've been writing a lot. Do you think that one needs a daily practice, hisbodedut, going and thinking and talking to God, or does normative Jewish life, the 3 times a day you're praying, etc., does that provide all that a person needs? Or I guess in your personal practice, are you trying to set aside different times to sort of connect to the capital happiness, or to sort of bring that out, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I think everybody has a different formula. And that's one of the things I love about Judaism. There's the more Hasidic approach, and then there's the more, so to speak, non-Hasidic approach. You meet Ashkenazic Jews, and they're very different than Sephardic Jews. I think everybody has to find the recipe that works, as long as it's within the context of what we call halakha. I personally don't practice hitbodedut. I know that that's a big emphasis in Bretzlev Chassidus, to go into the forest and to speak to Hashem. I feel I'm in dialogue with God all the time. God as I so understand Him, which is a little bit different than maybe people who haven't studied the things that I've studied, may be different. But I think everybody has a different thing. I try to live mindfully, and to be very mindful. I believe in Shiviti Hashem Lenegdi Tamid, live with the presence of God in front of you, and the presence of God is the presence of what's real, the presence of what is, the presence of everyone, and realizing that every place you are and every person you meet is another ray of God, another expression of God. Not that they are God, but they are certainly an expression of God.
So if a person needs to visualize, or when you're thinking about it, because it is such a tremendous challenge, I understand the idea of going through your life. I understand, I'm not going to say I do this and I'd like to eventually one day do this, and kind of see that each one of these things is sort of handpicked and God's expressing, so to speak, Himself, or this is an expression of God. But like when you're working on like visualizing and focusing and when you're talking to God, so to speak, what is that? or you say conversation with God all the daily, what does that practically look like to you?
I don't try to visualize God. Just like I don't try to visualize myself. Right now, no one is seeing me, they're just seeing my face, right? But this is not me, this is just a reflection of me. The Talmud says, just as the soul sees and is unseen, so too God sees and is unseen. Meaning to feel God is to feel the power that fuels feeling it all. Looking for God uh, is like looking for light with a candle. The candle is a ray of light. And so I think as soon as a person starts looking for God, they have lost God. Because when you look for God, then you don't realize that God is obvious. The very yearning for God is the presence of God in your life already. The very yearning for a better life, a meaningful life, a purposeful life, a life of love, of compassion, of truth, of justice, that already is the presence of God in your life. The very yearning for God is, in some way, the very presence of God in your life. So I don't visualize God. I talk to God like I talk to myself, but I'm talking to my higher self that I share with the universe.
You've written 12 books, correct?
Oh, I wish. I've written
No,
8.
8 books. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, soon by 12. And you have a yeshiva, and you are working through the Facebook and the Facebook and various other social media channels. What do you feel and the cool thing about your book is you said that you weren't necessarily writing for others, but you were writing about the process that you were going through as you grew and as you matured.
I share the answers that have best responded to my questions, and I've shared that with other people, and it turns out a lot of people had the same questions I did.
So I guess perhaps that this question itself doesn't really start. I was going to ask, what do you feel is the most important lesson for our generation, or what do you feel is the most effective way of reaching the generation? But perhaps the answer is kind of what you're doing is just everyone being real with themselves. What would you say about that?
Actually, Rav Kook says that the beginning of returning to God is the returning to yourself. And as soon as you return to yourself, you will for sure return to God. And so the door to God is yourself. Not that you're God, but since your soul is I always say, if God were the sun, each of us would be a ray of his light. So if I were a ray of light, then my connection to the sun is through me. And the more I experience myself, I will experience myself as a part of a greater self, a greater soul, a greater reality, God. So everybody's in search of themselves. And when they would truly get in touch with themselves, they will understand that their self is part of a reality much greater than themselves. And they will find themselves outside of themselves. Kind of hard to explain in a short kind of a thing, but hopefully it'll give some of you all out there the beginning. Get in touch with your real self. Get real with yourself. And realize that all the powers within you are not from you. When you do that, you are deeply humbled and you are deeply grateful that the greatness that fills you is not you. It's part of a greater reality beyond you.
That was awesome. So if people want to follow you, find you, is there one specific book that you would recommend for the first time reader? How do we find you? Please tell us.
Well, certainly you can find me on rabbidavidaaron.com. That's AARON. And, in terms of which book, it all really depends on the person. My first book that I wrote was called Endless Light, The Ancient Path of Kabbalah to Love, Spiritual Growth, and Personal Power. That's a good place to start, but I wrote a book called Seeing God, which is an experiential guide to literally experiencing God in your life. I wrote a more philosophical book called The Secret Life of God that really explains who are we, who is God, what is the nature of our relationship, and Why is there so much pain in the world, and what are the parameters of our choice, and what ultimately is our choice about? I wrote a book called Love is My Religion that goes deeply into the secrets behind the book of Genesis. I wrote a book called Living a Joyous Life that goes into the details of, how to live according to the Torah. What are mitzvot? What are commandments? Why live them? What is Shabbat? What is kosher? What does it mean to pray? Depends where everybody's starting. Everyone has a different doorway to their Judaism, different place they want to start. So I wrote a book called The God-Powered Life, which is all about getting in touch with ourselves as part of a greater self, which is really God, is the universal self that we all share and we're all a part of. So I don't know, it depends who the person is that I would recommend what book to read.
And what about your yeshiva? Who's that for, and how do people find out about that?
Right. Well, I decided that I really wanted to start building leaders and taking this content and enables others to share it. And so the yeshiva is really focusing on students that just finished high school. They're 18-year-old, 19-year-old. They're before college. Most of them grew up in modern Orthodox homes, not all of them. And I find that audience is really the perfect candidate for really being the leaders of the next generation. They have a tremendous amount of knowledge already. They're just kind of missing some of the basic spiritual, soulful side of it. But they've got the vessel, and now we have to fill it with light. And when you put that together, you've got a very powerful, impactful guy.
Fantastic. Rabbi Aaron, thank you very much for your time. This is tremendous.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you. There you have it, folks, another inspiring episode. If you enjoyed this, I ask you to please share this with your friends and to like us over on Rabbi Rupp through Facebook or on YouTube. And the more that we're able to get these important messages out, the more that we can really make an impact in the world. So I encourage you, please, to stay tuned. We have a ton of amazing speakers coming up, and also to tell your friends about it. Thank you very much.